Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the SWAS. Got bowl games on Friday here. We got 5 of them, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, 5 games for Friday. They're on all day, starting at noon Eastern time. Gonna go through all of them in this video. Let's do it. Welcome to the SWAS. Hey, get the sauce. First up, we got Oklahoma versus Navy in the Armed Forces Bowl. This one's in Fort Worth, Texas. Navy catching 3 points in this one. I do see a couple 2.5s out there if you look. Total sitting at 43.5 pretty much across the board. Let's take a look at the pie charts, and according to the data, action seems to be coming in on the Oklahoma side. Over 60% of the tickets, about 55% of the money. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup. We'll start with the Oklahoma offense against the Navy defense. And on paper, Oklahoma should really struggle to move the ball here in this game. Oklahoma's 131st in the country in yards per play, 111th in success rate. Navy's defense is 65th and 68th. So obviously, raw data shows that Navy's defense is much better than Oklahoma's offense. That being said, you do have to take into consideration that Oklahoma is playing an extremely different type of schedule here. Oklahoma is playing an SEC schedule, and Navy's playing an American Athletic schedule. Slightly different levels of competition here between these two teams. But still, we know this Oklahoma offense hasn't been very good all year, and Navy's defense has actually been pretty solid. So do we think Oklahoma's able to move the ball in this game? Well, if you look at their last 3 SEC games, they did seem to figure something out. The offense wasn't great, but it was significantly better. That was the Missouri game, the Alabama game, the LSU game. In those 3, they were averaging 183 rushing yards per game, over 46% success rate per rush, 4.5 yards per carry, which was huge because this offense hasn't been able to run the ball the entire season. In their first 5 SEC games, they were averaging 2.34 yards per carry, 91 rushing yards per game. So in their last 3 SEC games, they seem to have figured it out a little bit. Here's the problem. Most of the rushing production in those 3 games came from Jackson Arnold. He was running the ball. In those last 3 SEC games, Jackson Arnold himself, from the quarterback position, had 59 carries, 251 yards rushing. Now, the reason I'm saying that's a problem, he's not playing in this game. He's in the transfer portal. He is not suiting up for this bowl game. Freshman Michael Hawkins Jr. is going to be playing quarterback for Oklahoma in this one. He did make a couple starts, and in those 2 starts, I mean, he's athletic. He showed us he can run the ball as well. 34 carries, 96 yards on the ground. Not quite as efficient as Jackson Arnold on the ground at the end there, but if you watch those games, you know this kid's definitely an athlete. Like, he can move, so just because Jackson Arnold isn't there doesn't mean I don't think this newly found rushing production from the quarterback position is just going to not be there for Oklahoma. This kid can definitely run. Something that worries me a little, though, when it comes to Oklahoma's offense in this game is they're going to be more one-dimensional than ever. I mean, if you followed Oklahoma football this year, you know that they've had all kinds of problems at wide receiver. I mean, there was one point in the season where I believe the top 6 wide receivers on the depth chart were injured. The top 6. In this game in particular, basically every wide receiver on the roster for Oklahoma is not playing in this game. Deion Burks might be the only one that actually plays, and it's not even confirmed if he's going to play. So if Deion Burks doesn't play in this game, I believe Oklahoma will have nothing but 7 freshmen. Will be the only wide receivers they even have active here, which could be a situation. If Navy comes into this game defensively knowing Oklahoma has to run the ball, it definitely makes the defensive game plan a little bit easier. I mean, Oklahoma really hasn't been able to throw the ball much this entire season. Now you take out Jackson Arnold and put Michael Hawkins in there, who has had problems throwing the football. You take away every single wide receiver they've had left is now gone. So Oklahoma's passing attack is just not much of a threat in this game, making the game plan, like I said, making the game plan for Navy's defense pretty easy here. Keep Oklahoma from running the football, and this Navy defense, no, they don't have the talent Oklahoma has. Yes, they played a bit of an easier, well, not a bit, they played a much easier schedule than Oklahoma, but they did finish the season playing some tough defense against the run. In their last 4 games, they allowed just 3.59 yards per carry, just 131 rushing yards per game, success rate per rush down at 39%, and I mean, Tulane's in there, ECU, Army, South Florida. I mean, it's not like these are absolute scrubs. No, they're talent-wise, they're not on the level of Oklahoma. But Navy's been playing some tough defense against the run. I don't think Oklahoma has much of a passing attack. In my opinion, Navy's defense should be able to hold strong in this one. But what about the matchup on the other side? And this is where it just gets tough for Navy. We know what Navy's offense is. They run the ball, they run the option. Same thing Navy's always done. The reason it's going to be tough is Oklahoma's defensive front when it comes to stopping the run might be as good as it gets in college football. I would put their run defense up there with Penn State, Ohio State, Texas. I mean, Oklahoma's defensive front is elite. On the season, they're 4th in the country in yards per carry allowed, 4th in success rate per rush, 12th in effective rush. Navy's going to have a hard time running the ball in this Oklahoma defense. Now, if you plan on betting Navy in this one, you can point at the fact that 2 of Oklahoma's main defensive pieces have opted out for the NFL. The safety, Billy Bowman Jr., I believe his name, and Stutzman, the linebacker, 2 of the most important pieces on Oklahoma's defense, have opted out. But from what I'm reading, the rest of Oklahoma's defense, in terms of the main pieces, are going to be playing in this game. And look how Oklahoma finished out the season against the run. Just 2.63 yards per carry allowed in their last 5 FBS games, 35% success rate per rush, just 92 rushing yards allowed per game. Look at the opponents: Ole Miss, Missouri, Alabama, LSU, South Carolina. So stopping the Navy offense after you've just spent 5 games stopping South Carolina, Ole Miss, I mean, these teams from running the ball, yeah, Oklahoma should be able to stop the Navy offense. Navy's only played 1 game all season against a top 25 defense. That was the Notre Dame game. In that one, they were held to 14 points, 40.4% success rate, 5.57 yards per play. Those numbers actually aren't terrible. I mean, 14 points, obviously that's not going to work. But 40.4% success rate, 5.57 yards per play, that's not practical joke bad. So maybe Navy's able to do a little bit here. But as a whole, it should be really tough sledding for a Navy offense against Oklahoma defense, who, like I said, pretty much elite when it comes to stopping the run. So where does that leave me in terms of placing a bet? Well, I can't take the +3 with Navy because, like I said, I just can't trust them to move the football here. But I'm not really comfortable laying with Oklahoma either because I don't know how much their offense is going to be able to do with no passing attack at all. So I think the best bet for me here is just take the under at 42.5. We should see both of these teams attempting to run the ball a lot. Clock should be continuously rolling. I like both defenses to put out great efforts, so probably just take the under, maybe a Navy team total under, something like that. Next game, we got Georgia Tech Vanderbilt in the Birmingham Bowl. Vanderbilt's catching 3 in this one, total sitting at 51, mostly 51. Do see a couple 50.5s if you look. Let's take a look at the pie charts, or the donut charts, I'm sorry. According to the data, over 65% of the tickets coming in on Georgia Tech, over 85% of the money. So action seems to be coming in on the Georgia Tech side. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup. We'll start with the Georgia Tech offense against the Vanderbilt defense. And I mean, look at the graphic. One side is very green, one side is very red. This should be a favorable matchup for Georgia Tech offensively. They're 37th in the country in yards per play, 35th in success rate. Vanderbilt's defense 104th and 115th. Now, obviously, when we're looking at a graphic like this, we have to keep in mind that Georgia Tech does play an ACC schedule. Vanderbilt plays an SEC schedule. You can't even compare the two. So Vanderbilt does play a much stronger schedule than Georgia Tech does. Regardless, Georgia Tech should be able to move the ball on Vanderbilt's defense. And if you're betting Georgia Tech in this game, you really like what you saw in the last game of the season. Week 14 on the road in Athens. They put up 42 points, over 6.7 yards per play, over 51% success rate. And the reason you like that, that was pretty much the first game Georgia Tech played with a healthy Haynes King at quarterback in over a month. In the 4 games before that, I mean, he sat out the Notre Dame game. He sat out the Virginia Tech game, I think it was. He wasn't able to throw the ball in 2 of them. So in the 4 games before that, Haynes King was not 100% or even close to it. Couldn't even throw the ball in the games he played. And you can see the Georgia Tech offense definitely suffered. Just 19.3 points per game, yards per play down at 5.1. So Haynes King healthy for that Georgia game on the road in Athens, and the offense looked great. Haynes King is confirmed to be playing in this game, and they're matched up against a Vanderbilt defense that did not finish the season on a good note. In their last 3 games, they allowed 29.3 points per game, over 7.2 yards per play, 56.5% success rate. Now, granted, Tennessee, LSU, South Carolina, I mean, they play an SEC schedule. It's kind of crazy, but definitely not great. They see Vanderbilt defense coming into this one off of 3 really bad defensive performances. Now, I do have some good news for Vanderbilt's defense, though. This is a defense that's been much stronger against the run. Their weakness is defending the pass. And the reason I'm bringing that up, not only is Georgia Tech an offense that wants to run the football, but their passing attack is going to be missing two key pieces, their left tackle and their leading receiver. Both opted out of this game. Now, I'm not saying Georgia Tech's offense is going to be completely crushed without these two pieces. Like I said, this is an offense that wants to run the ball, but trying to run the ball on Vanderbilt is, to an extent, playing into their strength. Now, I know if you look at those same last 3 games for Vanderbilt's defense, I mean, here are their numbers against the run. It doesn't look good. They're allowing over 5.3 yards per carry, over 55% success rate per rush, over 212 rushing yards per game. But if you look at the 6 weeks before that, I mean, just 4.24 yards per carry allowed, 123 rushing yards per game. You got Missouri in there. You got Alabama in there. You got Kentucky, Texas, Auburn, Ball State's in there as well. But the other 5, I mean, these are tough opponents. Like I said, the strength of this Vanderbilt defense is stopping the run. Am I saying Vanderbilt's defense is able to stop Haynes King and Jamal Haynes in the Georgia Tech rushing attack? No, I'm just saying don't be surprised if they're able to limit it a little. Don't be surprised if they're able to limit it a little. I mean, we did see them give Alabama problems. We saw them give Texas problems on the ground. This Vanderbilt defense against the run really isn't that bad. Now, if you are betting Georgia Tech, you like this. Ricky Wright, their starting safety, opted out. One of the most important pieces of the Vanderbilt defense against the run, opting out. So you definitely don't like that. But as a whole, I mean, look, Georgia Tech's going to run the ball. I think their passing attack's going to be a little limited, missing the left tackle and their star receiver. I think Vanderbilt's defense is able to put up a fight. Now, what about the matchup on the other side? We got Vandy's offense against Georgia Tech's defense. On paper, these two units pretty evenly matched. I mean, Vanderbilt 93rd in yards per play, 74th in success rate. Georgia Tech 88th and 73rd. You take into consideration the strength of schedule. Georgia Tech ACC schedule, Vanderbilt SEC schedule. I'd say Vandy has the edge here. What worries me most for Georgia Tech on this side of the ball is this right here. Now, what this is showing us is there are 2 games where Georgia Tech got absolutely smoked on the ground. Against North Carolina and NC State, they allowed over 7.2 yards per carry, 51% success rate per rush, 227 rushing yards allowed per game in those 2. In their other 9 FBS games, they actually played great defense against the run. 3.86 yards per carry, 109.4 rushing yards allowed per game. Now, you might be thinking, Kyle, Vanderbilt's trying to run the ball. How is this a negative for Vandy? I mean, it shows that in 9 of their FBS games, they were able to play great defense against the run. This is a positive angle for Georgia Tech. Well, what worries me is those 2 games on the left side, North Carolina and NC State. The player that did most of the damage on the ground in those 2 games, Criswell and CJ Bailey, 2 mobile quarterbacks. Georgia Tech struggles against mobile quarterbacks. What do you think Diego Pavia is? He's the definition of a mobile quarterback. He's at 716 rushing yards this year. And if you look through Georgia Tech's schedule, there really aren't many games here against mobile quarterbacks. You got those 2 games, North Carolina, you got NC State, you got Notre Dame. They were beat 31-13, and Riley Leonard had 60 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns. Now, Haynes King didn't play in that game, so the final score might be irrelevant, but Riley Leonard was able to do damage on the ground. The other one is Virginia Tech with Kyron Drones. They lost that game 21-6. Now, Kyron Drones didn't go off on the ground or anything in that game, but you remember, he was dealing with an injury. So, I mean, if you look at their schedule, looks like they had problems every single time they saw a mobile quarterback, and now they're seeing Diego Pavia. And Georgia Tech will be missing a couple starters on the defensive side of the ball. They're missing an outside linebacker and a safety. Neither of these are towards the top in terms of the highest rated run defenders or anything, but they will be missing 2 starters from this game in terms of opt-outs. Vandy was able to successfully run the ball in their last 3 games, 4.13 yards per carry, 113 rushing yards per game. Not very impressive. Look at the opponents. South Carolina, LSU, okay, but Tennessee. 2 of those 3 are 2 of the best defenses in the country, 48.6% success rate per rush. So this Vanderbilt offense knows how to move the chains. Diego Pavia, he just knows how to move the chains and stay on the field. I think Vanderbilt's offense is going to be able to move the ball on Georgia Tech, which is why when it comes to betting this game, I mean, Georgia Tech is probably 3 or more points better than Vanderbilt on a neutral field, but I think Diego Pavia is going to be able to move the ball and score some points in this one. I lean towards an over, but it's up at 51, and I expect both teams to run the ball, so clock continuously rolling doesn't exactly help an over. So I'm not going to bet the over. I think I'm just going to take Vanderbilt +3. Maybe a little bit of belief in the Magic, maybe a little bit of gambling here, but I want to bet on Pavia. I think this is going to be a close game, a back-and-forth game, and I think Pavia will get it done. So give me Vandy +3 next game. Texas Tech, Arkansas in the AutoZone Liberty Bowl. The Hogs are now catching points. I'm looking at mostly 1.5s. I do see a couple 2s out there. They were laying originally, so this line's been on the move. Total sitting at 51.5 or 52. Let's take a look at the pie charts, and according to the data, action's coming in pretty split. 50-50 tickets or 50-50 money. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the Texas Tech offense. And if you're a college football fan, you already know what the Red Raiders offense is about. They throw the ball early, often, and they move at a very quick pace. 25th in passing frequency, first in pace. And when we pull up this graphic right here, it may look like a beautiful matchup for the Texas Tech offense. Look at Arkansas's defensive numbers against the pass this year. 94th in yards per pass attempt allowed, 100th in success rate per dropback. So you got Texas Tech, an offense looking to throw the ball, against Arkansas's defense who struggles against the pass. There you go. Solid matchup for Texas Tech. However, there are a couple things here that concern me when it comes to Texas Tech's offense. Number one, Arkansas finished out the season playing some strong defense against the pass. In their last 3 games, they allowed just 178 passing yards per game, 6.1 yards per pass attempt, success rate per dropback under 34%. So Arkansas finished out the season playing some strong defense against the pass, and Texas is in there. The other games were against Mizzou, who's had quarterback problems this whole year, and La Tech. Not going to throw them a parade for shutting down Sonny Cumbie's passing attack, but still, Arkansas's defense was playing some solid defense against the pass to finish out the year. And oh yeah, we have to mention that Texas Tech star quarterback, he's the star of that team. I don't know if I would call him a star quarterback, but he is the leader of the offense here. Baron Morton, he is not playing in this game. Threw for over 3,300 yards this year, 7.2 yards per attempt, 27 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. They are going to be without their quarterback in this game. Starting in his spot is freshman Will Hammond. He did see the field a little bit this year. 15 of 23, 191 yards and a touchdown, 149.3 passer rating. The only game this year where we really saw Will Hammond see significant time was the TCU game, and honestly, he played well. He came in at halftime because Morton got hurt. The score was 17-14. Texas Tech was winning. Played him down to the end. They lost 35-34. He threw a couple touchdowns, I believe. So he came in on the road in a tough conference game, and he was making some throws. So, I'm not going to say I believe in Will Hammond, but there are worse options. This guy has experience. He played in a tough game, and he played well. Now, I'm definitely a little bit worried with the Red Raider offense as a whole. I know they finished out the season with 2 great games. Their last 2 games, over 381 passing yards per game, 48.7% success rate per dropback, over 8 yards per attempt. Those games were against Oklahoma State and West Virginia, probably the 2 worst pass defenses in the Big 12. Not even probably. Those are definitely the 2 worst pass defenses in the conference. If you look at the 5 games before that, this Texas Tech passing attack was definitely trending in the wrong direction for pretty much the entire second half of the year. So I definitely don't like that. And I also don't like how the quarterback, Baron Morton, is not the only offensive piece Texas Tech is going to be missing here. They're also missing a starting offensive tackle and their leading wide receiver. So this Texas Tech offense is seriously hobbled coming into this game. Now, Taj Brooks, it looks like, is going to play, so they still have their RB. And also, we have to mention that Arkansas is going to be missing some pieces on the defensive side as well. Starting safety, starting defensive end, and starting defensive tackle. So 3 starters out for the Arkansas defense as well. Overall, I like how Hammond does have some experience. I also like how Taj Brooks is going to play. I trust Texas Tech to run the ball a little bit. Even though they are a passing offense, they can hand it off. He's the all-time program leading rusher. Actually broke the record this year. So I think Texas Tech's offense should be able to make some noise in this game despite missing the pieces. Now we flip it over to the other side of the ball, and honestly, brace yourself. Those of you that hate bowl season, you're going to hate this. Arkansas's offense, 37th in yards per play, 8th in success rate. Texas Tech's defense, 109th and 91st. So you might look at this graphic and think, Hog's offense is going to go nuts here. Arkansas scoring on every single possession. Here's the problem. The entire offense is out. Now, the quarterback, their star quarterback, Taylor Green, is going to play, but check this out. Here are the starters missing from the Arkansas offense in this game. Center, left guard, right guard, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 4, tight end 1, tight end 2, RB1, RB2. It actually would have been faster for me to list the pieces that aren't missing from the starting offense here, which would be wide receiver 3, the quarterback, and both tackles. That's it. Everyone else is gone. What in the hell are we supposed to do with that? Everyone's missing from this offense. It's Taylor Green and an entirely new offense. So yeah, safe to say it's going to be pretty unpredictable on this side of the ball. And you know what? Texas Tech, as bad as the second half of the season has been for them, we did see them play a few good defensive games there down the stretch. They got absolutely lit up in week 13 on the road at Oklahoma State. They gave up 48 points. It was bad. But if you look at the 3 games surrounding that, weeks 10, 10, 11, and 14 against Iowa State, Colorado, and West Virginia. Some good offenses. They actually held those three teams to 5.42 yards per play, 41% success rate. So down the stretch, Texas Tech actually was playing some decent defense in there, which is why when it comes to betting this game, I mean, it has to be Texas Tech. I know I got a freshman quarterback in there, but the entire Arkansas offense is out. So give me Texas Tech anything below a field goal. Next game, Syracuse, Washington State in the DirecTV Holiday Bowl. This line is 17. Washington State catching 17 points in this one, total sitting at 59.5. Let's take a look at the pie charts, and according to the data, action's coming in pretty heavily on the Syracuse side. 75% of the tickets, about 75% of the money. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this matchup. We'll go through it quickly. There's a reason this line is 17. I'll get to it in a second. But real quick, the matchup between the Syracuse offense and the Washington State defense, very favorable matchup for Syracuse here. Syracuse, as I'm sure you know, very dangerous passing attack. They're 35th in the country in yards per pass attempt, 7th in success rate per dropback, 2nd in effective pass. Now, you might look at the right side of this graphic and say, hey, that plays into the strength of the Washington State defense. They were terrible against the run. They actually played some decent defense against the pass this year. And I mean, you wouldn't be wrong. They're 43rd in yards per pass attempt allowed, 87th in success rate per dropback. But a couple things about that. Number one, Washington State doesn't play a ton of elite passing attacks. I mean, early in the season, they did see Texas Tech and Washington. That was back in weeks, I believe, 2 and 3. Since then, I mean, what's the best passing attack they've seen since week 3? I'm looking at their schedule now. Maybe I don't even know. I mean, maybe Fresno. They haven't seen many passing attacks as of late. And if you look at their last few games, I mean, they did play great defense against Wyoming. Wyoming, one of the worst offenses in the entire country. If you look at the 3 games before the Wyoming game in week 14, I mean, they were allowing 35.7 points per game, over 51% success rate, 6.28 yards per play. That was against New Mexico, Oregon State, and Utah State. You cannot compare those 3 offenses to Syracuse at all. So, yeah, this is a mismatch. Syracuse should have no problem scoring points on Washington State's defense. But get this, it gets even worse than that. Washington State, on the defensive side of the ball, they're going to be missing their number 1 corner, their number 2 corner, safety, linebacker, and both D tackles. This is against Syracuse offense, who's going to be at full strength, by the way, missing 3 of the top 4 members of the secondary against the Syracuse passing attack. It should be bad. I don't know how they make a single stop. And by the way, on the Syracuse side, head coach Fran Brown said, we don't opt out around here. He said he expects everyone to play. So, yeah, Kyle McCord's going to be playing in this game. They should score on basically every single drive. On the other side of the ball, this is where you can find some value on Washington State on paper. I mean, Washington State was able to move the ball and score points this year. They're 31st in yards per play, 10th in success rate. Syracuse defense, 104th in yards per play allowed, 93rd in success rate. So maybe Washington State can move the ball a little bit in this game. Number one, you got to take into consideration that they played a much easier schedule than Syracuse. And number two, Mateer's out, the quarterback. Their leading rusher, their running back, well, the leading rusher is actually the quarterback, Mateer, but their RB's out as well. Their wide receiver too, and their starting right tackle. Syracuse is going to be pretty much at full strength here, and Washington State is missing 10 starters on both sides of the ball. So, yeah, this should be an absolute beatdown. The bet I placed is Syracuse team total over 38.5. I got it at plus 100. I know it's crazy, team total over 38.5, but I truly don't know how Washington State makes any stops. So Syracuse should score a lot of points in this game. Should be pretty fast-paced. Should be a lot of points scored, period, specifically by the Syracuse side. So I'm on Syracuse team total over 38.5 next game. USC, Texas A&M in the SRS Distribution Las Vegas Bowl. This one's at Allegiant. USC, I believe, is catching 4. Let me just double check. Yeah, it's still mostly 4. There are a couple 3.5s out there. Total sitting at 52 or 52.5. Let's take a look at the pie charts here, or donut charts, I should say. According to the data, action's coming in pretty heavily on the Aggie side. 85% of the tickets, 90% of the money. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup. We'll start with the Texas A&M offense against the USC defense. And surprisingly, well, maybe I shouldn't say surprisingly, but it's important to point out that we should be getting both these units relatively close to full strength here. USC is missing a corner, but they're also getting a linebacker back from injury, one of their better defenders. So USC's defense is in pretty good shape here, and same goes for Texas A&M offensively. Marcel Reed's going to be at quarterback, pretty much bringing out their full unit. So we should see quite the battle here on this side of the football. And on the full season, these two units might be a little more evenly matched than you might think. Obviously, Texas A&M's offense probably has the slight edge, but USC's defense has been pretty tough this year. Texas A&M 55th in yards per play, 40th in success rate. USC's defense 76th and 89th. I mentioned before USC is missing their main corner. So is Texas A&M going to be able to move the football in this game? Well, if you subscribe to this channel, you've heard me say this several times before. I personally don't think the Texas A&M offense is very dangerous with Marcel Reed at quarterback if the opposing defense has the week to prepare for Marcel Reed. I'll let you know, in case you're new to the channel, I'll let you know what I mean by that. If you already subscribed to the channel, you know exactly what I mean by it. But Marcel Reed, right, in his prepared starts, so in the games where the other team knew Marcel Reed was going to be starting at quarterback, prepped all week for Marcel Reed to be starting at quarterback. In those games, the Texas A&M offense didn't look all that good. 25.5 points per game, 5.56 yards per play, 43.1% success rate. That includes a game against Bowling Green. The two games where Marcel Reed just went off and showed out, one was the Florida game early in the season, and nobody knew he was going to play quarterback until the last second. Connor Wegman, I mean, he was listed as questionable. Nobody knew what was up. Last minute, it's announced that Marcel Reed's going to start. It was his first action, his first time ever seeing the field, so Florida didn't even know what to expect. Completely caught the Florida defense off guard. And then later in the season, in the LSU game, that's the other game where Marcel Reed looked great. Connor Wegman started that game. Marcel Reed came in, I want to say at halftime or in the third quarter, and again, completely caught LSU off guard. They game planned for Wegman. You throw Marcel Reed in there, I mean, completely different type of quarterback. The overall point I'm making here is it seems when defenses had the week to prepare for Marcel Reed at quarterback, he wasn't nearly as good. One thing about the Texas A&M offense when Marcel Reed's playing quarterback is they become more run dependent, right? Connor Wegman's more of a thrower. Marcel Reed's more of an athlete. Reason I'm bringing this up, I mean, Notre Dame ran the ball all over USC. If you look at the 6 games before that, USC's defensive front was hanging tough. I mean, in the 6 games before the Notre Dame game, they're allowing just 3.67 yards per carry, success rate per rush under 40%, just 107 rushing yards allowed per game. You got Nebraska in there. UCLA is kind of a passing offense. Same goes for Washington. Rutgers is in there. They can run the ball. Penn State, Maryland, more of a passing offense. Point I'm making is USC's run defense is actually playing pretty well down the stretch. Now, I don't want it to sound like I'm doubting Marcel Reed's ability to throw the football. He can throw the ball, and he has had a few decent games throwing the football. I mean, he's got solid passing numbers on the year. 7.8 yards per attempt, 12 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, just a C+ QB rating, and a D+ big-time throw rate. So like I said, this is more of a run-dependent offense when Marcel Reed's at quarterback. Is he capable of making throws on the USC secondary? Probably. They are missing their best corner, but USC runs a lot of man coverage, 39th most in college football, 39th in man coverage frequency. Texas A&M passing numbers against man, pretty bad this year. So don't really trust Texas A&M to come in with a passing attack. Are they able to run the ball on USC? I mean, probably. Texas A&M's a pretty elite program. But like I said, USC's been playing tough defense against the run. So I don't hate this matchup for USC defensively. That defense has really impressed me this year. I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to play tough with Texas A&M's offense. Now we flip it over to the other side of the ball, and in my opinion, this is where we just draw a huge question mark because on the other side, we should see both of those units close to full strength. The USC defense against the Texas A&M offense, not a ton of opt-outs, not a ton of missing pieces. On this side of the ball, that is not the case. Texas A&M's defense and USC offense both missing a lot of key pieces here. So on the full season, Texas A&M's defense is 55th in yards per play allowed, 18th in success rate. USC's offense 17th and 17th. So on paper, this should be an elite battle here. The problem is we got to talk opt-outs, and Texas A&M is missing 3 of the 4 starters on their defensive line. 3 of the 4 starters. So Texas A&M's defensive line is gutted here. And on the USC side, all of their weapons are out. 3 of their top 4 receivers, including Branch, who's probably their best weapon. Also, Woody Marks not playing in this game, and RB2. So USC's offense missing a ton of weapons, and they're missing their starting right tackle. So USC's offense probably more hit than Texas A&M's defense with missing pieces, but the defensive line being gutted like that, definitely not something you like to see, considering USC's been running the ball extremely efficiently in the second half of the year. In their last 8 games, they're averaging over 5.7 yards per carry, over 152 rushing yards per game, almost 52% success rate per rush. Now, again, they're missing Woody Marks and their RB2, so obviously this is going to take a hit. They're missing both their backs. But check out USC's offensive line metrics here. 8th in line yards, 29th in stuff rate. USC might be able to generate some push in the run game against Texas A&M's defensive front, against a Mike Elko defense. That sounds kind of crazy, but remember, I mean, you look at the left of this graphic, you're like, no, they're not against Texas A&M's defensive line. Keep in mind, they're missing 3 out of 4 starters on the defensive line. So I know it sounds crazy, but I think USC is going to hand the ball off and be able to run the ball on Texas A&M, even with RB3 taking the carries. Remember, this is USC football. If there's one position group where USC probably has an abundance of talent, it's weapons, wide receivers, and running backs. There's a very popular destination. I don't know who the RB3 is. I'm not going to pretend to, but it's USC. I'm sure it's somebody who's very talented. And Texas A&M against the run, kind of trending in the wrong direction here. Through the first 8 games, it looked great. Just 3.5 yards per carry allowed. It was looking like Mike Elko brought his elite run defense from Duke right over to Texas A&M and didn't miss a beat. That being said, in the last 4 games, they were allowing over 4.8 yards per carry, 44% success rate per rush, almost 205 rushing yards per game. So again, I know it sounds crazy. I think USC might be able to run the ball in this game. Now, the big question mark for me on this side of the ball is right here. Will Jaden Maiava be able to throw the ball in the Texas A&M defense? And I honestly think the answer might be no. I mean, his numbers look good, and he's looked pretty good since taking over the starting job. He's made the last 3 starts for USC, 293 passing yards per game, 46.4% success rate per dropback, 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Against Notre Dame, very respectable. Nebraska's secondary, a little disappointing this year. UCLA, not the toughest defense, so maybe not the gauntlet here in terms of opponents, but he looked great in the Notre Dame game, and I trust this kid. I do think he's good. I think he's going to be a good quarterback next year. What worries me a little for Maiava is the Texas A&M pass rush. They are missing both of their edge rushers. They're both going to the NFL draft. So they lost 2 NFL caliber talents on the edge there. But this is Texas A&M. We just talked about how USC probably has an abundance of skill position players on the offensive side of the ball. Texas A&M is edge rusher U. So if there's one school that probably is pretty deep when it comes to edge rushers, it's probably Texas A&M. So I still trust them to be able to generate pressure on Jaden Maiava, and we've seen his production dip off when pressured. So if I'm Lincoln Riley, I'm sticking to the run here. The run game's been working. I do think they'll be able to run the ball a little bit on Texas A&M and see what happens, which is why when it comes to betting this game, I mean, if it's 4, it's got to be USC for me. I personally would have this one at 3. So at 4, screw it. Let's take the Trojans. So I think it's a great bet. Not really. Probably just doing a bit of gambling here, but I'll take USC +4 in this one. I think they're able to run the ball a bit. Live show. All right, so we got day games. I'm not sure if I'm going to do a morning stream. We definitely will still do a live show at 4 p.m. Eastern time. We'll go through the NBA, maybe some college basketball if there is any. So we'll definitely do that. I might do a morning live stream for college football. I'll let you know. I'll post it on YouTube when I know. So, yeah, if you're able to make it to the live stream, we'd love to see you in the comments. Hit me up in the Discord if you need me. Please remember to bet responsibly. Have a good one.